I was talking to Isaiah Thomas, not the basketball player, the at-large city council contestant the other day. He's running for city council. He lives in the Northwest, and he works with people like Sherelle Parker, one of our council people. And I was telling him about the work of our team and why we do it. And I said, we're like a coalition. We're part of the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities. There's 64 organizations connected to us. Faith-based ones like Circle of Hope, but we also are connected to labor unions. We're connected to affordable housing developers, groups connected to people that are looking for accessible housing, so they're disability activists, as well as people interested in urban agriculture, right? Big, wide coalition of people, and we're trying to put money into the Housing Trust Fund in Philadelphia to supplement affordable housing development. That's the idea. You heard about it all evening, about problems facing Philadelphians, and housing and green space, accessible housing, affordable housing, and green space is one of them. So we came together, and we've been on this coalition for nearly 10 years doing this work. And when he asked me, well, why do you care about this? I said, because when Jesus says to love our neighbors, I actually take him seriously. You know, it's not just a rhetorical thing. It's not just a nice dictum that makes me feel good, right? When I love my neighbors, I actually have to keep them as my neighbors. You know, I can't just push them out of the neighborhood, right? And so there's something deeply spiritual about this. When people ask me, what's Circle of Hope's interest in being in the coalition? It's to act like Jesus in Philadelphia, right? It's to help the people that make up city council act more like Jesus. I actually want them to be more like Jesus than they are. And I want to move them in that direction because I really believe that they started their work in public service with similar motives to mine. But even working on the coalition, you can see how quickly that a wide-eyed idealism can deteriorate, right? It's hard to do the work. It's hard to make deals, negotiate with people, serving their own self-interest. You know, it's like buying a used car, right? You really don't know what you're going to get at the end of the deal, right? And so there's some trepidation even in doing that. But I want to help them move with the Holy Spirit and act more like Jesus. That's the idea that we're working on. And it's been really great to listen to the stories tonight because they're really connected to the work. And I can actually see how far-reaching anti-gentrification work is, how far-reaching work that allows us to have more green space in our neighborhoods is. You know, the idea that everybody in Philadelphia deserves a good neighborhood that isn't too expensive, right? That's encouraging. So hearing this is really helpful, especially when we work with these city council people, and it's kind of hard to see that vision, right? Because it's so easy for that hope, that even hope in Jesus, it's so easy for that to be deteriorated by an experience that moves you towards cynicism, right? And just thinking that this isn't going to work, you know. We're just never going to get you to care about poor people in Philadelphia, right? That's too big of an ask. I have to figure out how else I can do it, right? How am I going to convince developers to give us just a small amount of their earnings to care for somebody poor, right? That's met with howls of protest, hyperbolic demonstrations of oppression. Right? Because you know, that's and it really is. Any iota you give to someone else is met with that kind of resistance, right? And then you can think, where's God in this whole world? How's this even working? You know? And so I also have hope in the work that we're doing because I'm connected to a community that's doing something differently. Right? I actually see an expression of the gospel and of Jesus in a way that restores my hope, right? So that I can go and try to do practical things that help people stay where they are, right? Help neighborhoods develop, become safer, become more accessible, have amenities, so that everybody in Philadelphia can live somewhere decent, right? So let me tell you a story about how this happened recently. Not recently, it was 6 years ago when we started it's the biggest land bank in any city across the country. This was one of our big legislative achievements. So first problem, Philadelphia at the time had 40,000 vacant parcels of land. So that's an unbelievable number. Many of them were publicly owned by the government, and others were privately owned with tax delinquent owners, which is how the city ends up seizing so much property, right? Second problem, developers, like dozens that are around my North Philly neighborhood, end up grabbing up all this land, really like it's the Wild West, and then they develop it into substandard housing that can't survive any sort of punishment period. And then even though the housing is kind of crappy, it still drives up rental prices, right? So we're not even getting a good deal here. The neighborhood isn't really improving, but it's getting more expensive somehow. And then the third problem is blighted neighborhoods like the ones like Darrell Clark's 5th District where I live, or Maria Quinones Sanchez's 7th District, have plenty of vacant land. And neighborhood community organizations who want to provide things like affordable housing and green space and urban farms and good businesses have tremendous amount of trouble acquiring the property. They couldn't get it. They couldn't find how to buy it or procure it in another way. And then they can't afford them anyway when they managed to wade through all the bureaucracy, right? Real complicated system at the time. And so Maria Quinones Sanchez introduced a bill about the possibility of a land bank in city council in like 2010 or so. And the idea was all the city's vacant land could be put into a land bank and then sold at fair prices through a transparent, community-controlled process with equity in mind. That was the idea. And the organization was called the Campaign to Take Back Vacant Land there, and Circle of Hope was a part of it. And they kind of lobbied for this bill for 3 years. And it was such a great idea. It was worth, for me and others, wading through the swamp of the city government's indifference and self-interest to actually do it. No, I'm going to put myself out there and see what's going to happen. Because we might actually get something that practically improves people's lives, and then I'm gonna put Jesus all over it, right? I'm gonna say, no, Jesus helped us get this, right? Because I want that actual, tangible, practical expression of the gospel to happen. So you're probably familiar with the slowness of city politics, right? You've probably waited in a room for your number to be called. I think there's like sloths working, right? That's how it feels like sometimes. Some of you might work for the city, so I'm insulting you. But it takes a long time for a good idea to come to fruition, and the time finally came, right? One Monday, hundreds of people filled up the chambers of City Council to be present this was just a committee hearing for the land bank bill. It has to get voted out of committee to get to the floor. And we got there at 9:30. And then we waited like an hour for the show to start. So we're just sitting around, right? The activists are there demonstrating power, and of course City Council waits an hour because maybe they'll leave if we don't. And I think Clark thinks like this too. So we finally got going, and it was the Nutter administration at the time sent ill-prepared people to discuss the bill and amendments to it. So that took an hour. We're 2.5 hours in, and nothing's happened yet. And so we start listening to inspired and generally positive testimonies over the next several hours. Rachel, you gave a testimony at this committee hearing, as I recall. Rachel's back there. And I loved how passionate people were about the subject. But the city council people were kind of just waiting for them to get through their testimonies and kind of whispering to each other. I was watching them saying, why are we even here? You're not even listening to what we're saying. You're just waiting for this to be over. And so when the testimonies were finally over, during which amendments were being discussed and other secrets hushed along, we have a bill right here, and then the boys' club, and it was all men on this committee. Janie Blackwell's the only woman on the committee at the time. They took a recess, so they left. They left with the bill in hand. And what were they going to do to the bill that we worked on? So they had, and I could watch them behind. There's like a fence that normal citizens can't go in front of, right? And then all the special royalty, they're back there talking to each other. Sorry, this sounds so negative. And so they had these huddles behind this gated-in area, and the public watched, right? We couldn't tell what was happening. And amendments were being discussed to the bill and agreed upon. And and the gossip that morning was that the committee wasn't ready to vote on the bill. And when a bill can't get out of the committee, it's dead, right? That's the idea. And so then all of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, they amended our bill in a variety of ways. It was voted on by 6 of the 7 people, sent out of committee, and the afternoon was over. So we were there, we did a tiny thing, and then all of them kind of worked out their secret deal behind the gate. And I couldn't help but wonder if the public action and time meant anything. Like, we've been working on this for 3 years. And later on, for 5 years, we'd be working on attaching a linkage fee to new development to go into the Housing Trust Fund. These things take a long time. Concerned Philadelphians doing everything we can do to get a crucial and, I think, important bill passed. And then at the end of it, we just observed, armed with little more than a vote against a candidate that we don't really approve of in favor of one we kind of don't, right? Like, what is really going on? That's democracy. That's the whole thing. This is the height of involvement. It seems like a raw deal. Like when we were talking to Isaiah the other day, and he talks like a mile a minute. And of course, he's like, yeah, this issue is really easy for me. I care about affordable housing. And then he says, well, can I get your coalition's endorsement? And I was like, oh man, that's why we did this. First of all, we can't even endorse you. We're all 501c3s. We can't endorse a candidate. But that's what you wanted. Wow, that's a little devastating, right? You know, and the story of the bill is the positive one. We're supposed to say it was a win, and even with the linkage fee, even though the rules of the Housing Trust Fund changed in a way that still benefited people way above average median income in Philadelphia, it's still a positive one. And I can tell you, I think, from my vantage point, the good guys are winning. It's awesome, right? But why does it feel so anticlimactic? You know, why so much work for such little gain? I can't live like that, right? I actually need hope and something more, right? I don't know what I would do if I just worked in politics. You know, I can't help but think it's so anticlimactic because the system itself is so possessed with problems, and you might even say evil interests already, both in this world and out of it, right? If you enter the city council chambers, you really should utter the name of Jesus out loud, so whatever spirits are there leave you alone. I'm being totally serious, by the way. Paul tells us, the Apostle Paul, governments are necessary, but they just don't seem good to me. And because of that, I'm thankful that we have a different thing we're doing together, right? These compassion teams are grounded in a movement of Jesus, in Circle of Hope. You know, we have an alternative community that does things a little bit differently, not perfectly, but at least with the intent of doing it in a God-honoring way. You know, we have goals that are driven by the Spirit, represented by a common voice of discernment. You really, from hundreds of people in the community, you know. There's no council members, right? Our leadership team structure is there's no city council members. We have a council, which is all of you, right? There's a bigger thing happening. And our leadership structure is intentionally flat. You know, we have 4 full-time pastors. We have 3 part-time staff like 6 full-time staff, depending on how you count the numbers, right? We have people that lead us in that way. We think of them, our leadership team, as servant leaders. You know, they're not masked political individuals who aren't listening and whispering secrets to each other. So our community, which pretty much means everyone that considers themselves as such, does work in a way that moves us forward. They're prayerful, they discern. We even do brainstorming in ourselves to develop a map that we're all going to follow for the year, right? There's a very different way of discussing things openly, of approving it as a body, And not even just by lay leaders or paid staff. We think the spirit of consensus and mutuality is right where Jesus and the Holy Spirit live. And so because I live in an environment like that actively, I can then go and wade through the bureaucracy of city government in Jesus' name for a good cause. I have that kind of hope and that kind of stamina to do it, and I can point them towards Jesus too, because you all are pointing me towards Jesus all the time. So I can wade through that bureaucracy like a land bank. Like a land bank we can trust is what we said. But I'll tell you what, it's nice to return back to a community that loves God and loves people. Especially after we spent a day in the old phallic building of City Hall waiting for the emperors to decide something and kind of debate their own interests, right? So it's refreshing to be together here, and that gives me fuel to keep doing this work, to helping our neighbors in practical ways. So real quick, if you want to get involved, we're working right now on a piece of legislation, okay? We're trying to get expired abatement money into the Housing Trust Fund. So let me know if you're interested. We're meeting with all the at-large candidates next week. So if you want to meet some potentially famous people, let me know. Thanks a lot.